Hey everybody, it's Professor Dipley. This is History 110, Unit 8, lecture video 2. Alright, we are left off about to start about urban growth. Part of this now with the new movement, ability to move with innovation and transportation, you start to get urban expansion as more and more jobs, especially later with industrialization, became possible. And so cities, especially in the West, served as manufacturing trade centers, and really they stood at the center of these interregional trade, and they grew up enormously as sort of cities that did one thing. Like Cincinnati becomes porkopolis, St. Louis has lots of production later in beer and other things, and so they begin to grow enormously and quickly as you get better and better movement, trade opportunities that again increased urbanization. Here, a lot of this urbanization is people moving from the countryside to cities. You're going to get some immigration, and that is a part of this, but it's not all of it. One of these, especially Chicago, which becomes the center of the trade, just like New York, all the roads and canals and railroads are going to lead New York. Chicago is that area out in what is now the Midwest. That grows from a small town. The top image here is Chicago in 1833. Go 24 years in the in the future. The bottom image here is Chicago growing into a city. You can see how this grows into not just a city, a metropolis. Again, all these manufacturing and transportation innovations. So Chicago becomes a manufacturing center, a trade center, a finance center, all of these things. Increasingly, you see more and more trains coming into Chicago. Here gives you an idea. So this is Chicago 1833, Chicago in 1877, in 1916, and even grows bigger today. You can see the growth of these major cities throughout the U.S. here. Again, Cincinnati is another one of these. One of the things we'll look at is factories, the American system of manufacturers, more and more production. So a lot of production before this was done by hand. But now you start, and in small workshops, now what you get for the first time are factories, the factory system. Here is the first factory in the United States, Slater Mills in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Factories started in England. They took, Slater actually memorized the plans for the factory, brought it to America, rebuilt it here. And so it's actually Rhode Island and then later in New England. Factories where you get large groups of workers under supervision, replace hand tools with power-driven machinery and produce on a large scale. Textile is always the first one of these because people need it, but that's always need clothes, so you're going to see the earliest innovation. First industrial revolution, and that's what we're talking about here. Second industrial revolution comes later with steel, chemicals, electricity, that sort of thing. Here, we're talking about early ones in, steam-powered and mostly having to do with textiles. That's what we call the first industrial revolution. Largely in New England, you can see this still around here, a lot of factories. So again, here's the first one. And you see, most early factories were water-powered, and so they were built on fall lines where small river breaks, waterfalls. Holyoke is a perfect example of this. The canals, why did they build it there? Well, you have the falls in Holyoke, and then they built the canals within there to help move around. Other places, Lowell, Ware, in Massachusetts. The water shops, which in Springfield, which is what's now One Allen Street, excuse me. And so you start to get steam power rather than just the water power. The other problem with water power is water freezes, so it doesn't, and rivers don't flow at the same pace all the time. So eventually, steam power is going to be used. You can generate your own power that way. We don't have to build them on fall lines. Now we can move them further and further. Once we get electrical power plants and power generation later in the 20th century, especially, you're going to get be able to build factories anywhere. But this is what we're talking about, a fall line. I think this is Ware, actually. And where you can see where the falling water is used to generate the turbine, move the turbines, generate power there. You see this more at power looms and the factories here out in Waltham. Some factories began using power looms. Again, this is ability to make clothing and textiles faster. You get Boston Associates, a very powerful finance group that built many of the factories in New England, especially out here, in Western and Central Mass, Waltham. Factory towns like Lowell and Holyoke, where that's what they're built around, is providing this industrial labor. Here's an early depiction of Waltham, with the first factory there in the bottom left. This is American System Manufacturers, though, was mass production and interchangeable parts that could easily be assembled into standardized finished products. You see this with Eli Terry and Eli Whitney in Connecticut in clocks, but especially here, the Springfield Armory is a major and major part of this. It used to be guns were handmade, and so it was very hard. If it broke, you had to replace parts. Nearly impossible. Now they're standardized. Think about that. Standardized parts, you could order more. But the Armory was a major player in this and really did change the way we produce things. One of them would be the Blanchard lathe, which allowed for standardized production. This is actually one from the Armory Museum. It actually works still. It'll show you how to work, but it makes the and here's another depiction of the lathe. Really does make the butts of the guns and other fittings standardized, and that's a big part of it. Standardization. Here you can see the cotton mills that all grow up in New England, especially Eastern Mass, and Connecticut, Rhode Island, places like that. You can see it all the way into New York, Pennsylvania. Here's a mill on the Brandywine. But this also changed people's lives, working in factories. It used to be you're a farmer, you worked by the sun, the day. Now you work by bells. So this is the first time where people have to start keeping track of time, where clocks, you're on the clock. I mean, look at this from the Holyoke Mills. For the Holyoke Mills in the 1850s, Holyoke, Mass. This is how you worked your day now, by the morning bell, the yard gates, breakfast, lunch, all that. Really long days. But you worked at someone else. So instead of being a craftsman where you made things at your own pace, you worked how you want. Now you work at a factory, and you work when let me think about it now. When do you go to work? When the boss tells you. When do you take a break? When you're allowed. When do you leave? That sort of thing. So more and more there's a very little, control of your own sort of ways of work. You now work for someone else, and it really is different, but then natural rhythms and seasons of the days. And we see this again, the idea of clocks. You're now on the clock. You work for a price, and labor. You used to work for a price, right? I'm going to make you this table. Here's the price. And then you work how you need to. Now you work for a wage, right? You work according to hourly or daily rates, and you start to see clocks more and more pop up. The top one is Allen Street. So why do you need a clock on the factory? So everybody knows. Here's at the Armory, right? Why did you need on Stick Campus? Why do you need clock towers? Again, so workers know when they have to go in. And their control over their work is diminished. You have a manager who supervises, that sort of thing. For a lot of people, this has really felt like a loss of freedom and control over one's labor. Here's some more from Lowell. You begin to see some more of the bells. Again, that's how people work their days. Here's more of it. These are the factories that were established in Holyoke, starting in this era. Here's more showing, the factories, the growth of Holyoke. And this is the other thing, the mill girls. This is another one. There's another article you should read on this. But increasingly, or at least at first, a lot of the mills, especially out in Lowell and later Chicopee, you started to have young women coming into the workforce on their own, female and child labor in all these. You had unmarried farm girls dominated the workforce. This is the first time in America that women entered the public workforce in such numbers. The women, the young girls, were often strictly supervised. Company boarding houses, personal conduct, mandatory lectures, and church time on how to act properly. Despite all this, many of the girls actually saw this as relative independence rather than compared to other women or being stuck on the farm, that sort of thing. You can see the websites and readings. There's more detail on this. But, if you've never been out there, Lowell is a great museum for this era. They've really kept a lot of it how it was. You could see what it was like. You could see working in these factories with the belt systems. It is like another world there. But here, these low offerings. This was a newspaper journal for the mill girls. And again, these factory girls or the mill girls. And again, they're girls. Why are they called girls? Well, you can see a lot of them in there really do look like little girls. Younger girls that came in here. They weren't expected. They were going to work there forever. They would work there for a while, add money for the family, maybe a little bit for their own, but then would of course go back and do what was expected of them, raise a family, that sort of thing. The other thing you get here is immigration. This is the first real large scale immigration in America. Outside of the colonial times. It's fueled by demand for labor. You get all these new factories, all this building projects. We need more people. Modernization of agriculture in Europe pushed peasants off the land, so they need somewhere to go. And so America became that area. Small craftsmen also. And so it was also easier to get across the ocean. So in these 20 years, you get 4 million immigrants enter the U.S., almost all from Ireland and Germany. Ireland sent the most. 90% of them end up in northern cities where there are job opportunities. Some became farmers. Very few went to the South because they can't compete with slave labor. Most immigrants at first were male who, once established themselves, brought over the rest of the family once they got a job and would stay here. And you can begin to see how this immigration moves up in these eras as the factories and all that begins a change. So this also creates a reaction against immigrants, and that's one of the discussion boards. Is this is something I've studied over time, and one of the things that's striking, if you read some of the different newspaper articles over time from this period, later in other eras of immigration, and today, complaints are the same. Things people say about immigrants are the same. What's changed is the place the immigrants originate. Even though we're a nation of immigrants, there's very much a nativism that this is America for Americans and not for immigrants. See the discussion board. It's very complicated. I discuss it also in the notes, that sort of thing. But why the Irish? You had the potato famine. The Irish were brutally mistreated in Ireland by British rule. In time, you had the potato famine where millions died. And those who survived then came over to the U.S. So they, eventually going to leave. At least 1 million people starve. You can read all this there. And then they start coming over to the U.S. And they're going to build the nation's railways, canals, common laborers. Why? They didn't have much education. You see, they had been banned from educating their children for centuries by the English. Had very few opportunities, especially if they remained Catholic, things like that. So this Black 47 is what it becomes known as. Then it goes on. Germans came in. Germans did better, though. Because industrialization had already begun over there in England, then Germany, and then over to the United States. So they came over better educated, with more money, more trades, and so they can come in and start better lives. You start to get them in two real big places. Out in the Midwest, the German Triangle, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Milwaukee. You could still see, that's why a lot of beer is still made out there. A lot of the German immigrants coming over there. They also create the first ethnic and immigrant neighborhoods, where Klein Deutschland, Little Germany on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which today is part Little Italy, Chinatown, Little Korea. You see these all over. That's very common for have immigrant neighborhoods. I mean, just think about going to a new country. Would you rather try to move in with people you don't know the culture, or at least transition in and work with, live amongst people with connections to the homeland that know the language? Your language can help you ease the transition. So this is not, this is very common everywhere around the world, not just here in the United States, but this again shows you increasingly where these people are landing. So here's the immigration again, mostly Irish and German at this point. You can see where they live in different areas. But it also creates this anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic feeling. You often saw these in, you had the Know Nothing Party. You saw these in usually urban areas where these immigrants are coming in. You have a discrimination against them, especially the Irish and others. I mean, you could see here, there's anti-Irish propaganda and more. There's nativist riots of killing of immigrants and fighting the government. In Philadelphia, here they burn in Charlestown, burn a convent in Massachusetts, an Irish convent. And again, we start to see a lot of this anti-immigrant feeling, which the argument is it's been around for a while and could be rising again. All right, we'll come back to the law and the market here in a minute, and for the video 3.